I'm from the Oak Park River Forest Community Foundation, and these are my fellow team members. Today we're going to share with you our project, which we call Cultivating Community. And so I'll provide just a bit of the overview. The presentation is structured with the theme of growing from seeds to germination, putting down roots, and then blossoming with flowers and fruit. So first, the seeds. And I'm going to describe to you the people and partners and organizations that were involved. So our team consisted of Kathleen Mulaney of Dominican University. Unfortunately, she's not able to join us today. She has a family wedding. Molly Philosophus of Hepzibah Children's Association, Michelle Zurakowski of the Food Pantry, and myself. And we want to acknowledge the group of Dominican University student volunteers, one of whom is here today, Tess. So we had several Dominican students who volunteered in our project. They were wonderful, very instrumental in the implementation of our project, which we'll describe later. The other students are Mickey Crespo, Tess Ferris, who is here today, Camelia Avina, Natalie Gwidich, Claudia Ramirez, Laura Rincon, Laura Roby, and Ty Turner. And our project would also not be possible without the involvement of the organization Root Riot. And the co-founders who were working with us are Amy Beltmaki and Seamus Ford. And so because of the community leadership program that brought us together, our organizations became involved. So Hepzibah, the Community Foundation, the Food Pantry, and Dominican University. And of course, we couldn't have really gotten off the ground without our sponsors. We couldn't have really broke ground, literally, without our sponsors. So we received a grant from the Community Leadership Program. We received support from Dominican University, as well as a grant from the Community Works Fund, which is a fund of the Community Foundation, and a grant from the Food Pantry. And we'd like to give special thanks to the following individuals and groups. Marianne Brown, who is also here today, Hepzibah Children's Association, the Dominican University Honors Program, Patty Spangler, Master Gardener, Donna Crocious, Master Gardener, the OPRF Food Pantry Volunteers, the family of Alex Anderson, and Hepzibah's Oak Park Auxiliary Board. So we're going to move on to germination. So we had the seeds and we germinated several ideas. So our group got together. You heard the mention of our project speed dating. Our team members got together and were thinking about, we want to build community, but more specifically work with kids because of the food pantry and their mission of reducing hunger, increasing food security. So how do we nourish and feed hungry people? Kathleen was really interested in sustainable agriculture. We're talking about gardens and planting. And then we looked at our options. So one option, because we had a former group member who had a strong connection at Julian Middle School. We were thinking, could we do a garden at Julian Middle School? Could we also somehow feed the students at Julian, because there are actually several students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we were thinking about summertime and what do the students eat in the summertime, because during the school year they get free and reduced lunch and often breakfast. But what really hit home with us was to have the garden at Hepzibah, because what we learned is every year Hepzibah plants a garden, flowers, but the issue is sustaining the garden through the summertime, watering it and caring for it. So we started thinking about what concerns and what possible challenges we might have. One of the biggest concerns is time. And so many of us, as all of you, are juggling your professional jobs, your family. We had the time we needed to be here in this program, as well as our other volunteer involvement. And our project idea was definitely up here big, wide scope, so how can we bring it down to a more feasible scope? The other concern was location. I mentioned that we decided on Hepzibah, but we're tossing a lot of ideas around. We even approached the Oak Park Conservatory to get their ideas, and also making it connected to the work that we do every day in our jobs. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who will describe how we put down roots.
Okay, so continuing this horticultural metaphor, the next phase of this was putting down roots, and I'm going to try to describe in this section both how we did that for the project itself and how we came to do that as a group. So we wanted to start with some turning points, and people often refer to these as aha moments, but in our group, we tended to use the language of love. So we said a lot like, oh, I love that idea, or I'm falling in love with these kids. Or the Dominican students were really, used the word love a lot in the work that they were doing, being the hope. So there were a couple of these turning points that were really key for us in our involvement as a group and for the project. One of them was Seamus Ford is there in the overalls. He's with Root Riot. We knew we were going to do a garden. We knew we were going to do a garden at Hepzibah, but we didn't know how we were possibly going to make that happen. And lo and behold, that day at CLP, Seamus came and talked to us, and it was love at first sight. we grabbed Seamus, and he fell in love with our project too, so that was a great turning point. The decision to have it at Hepzibah House also came with a sort of feeling of love and concern for the kids that reside there. And then also when Molly and I met with the Dominican students here on campus to talk to their class about potential volunteer opportunities, it was another one of those moments where everybody just felt like this was the right thing to do. So we knew we had a garden, and we knew we had a garden at Hepzibah, and Molly and I are both amateur gardeners and like to do that a lot at our home, and Kathleen has done a lot with sustainable agriculture on Haiti, but none of us really knew much about therapeutic gardening and what the involvement of vulnerable populations and populations of abused and neglected children might be. And so that's an area where the Dominican students really stepped up, and this is a piece of Tessa's paper that she did on children benefiting from horticultural therapy, where she did an exhaustive literature review and analysis of what are the benefits to the children of this kind of process. So about this time, we sat down and got very task-oriented. We tended to be a task-oriented group, and so we laid out some specific goals that we wanted to do in this project. So we knew we wanted to provide the Hepzibah kids with practical life skills, and we thought we might be able to do this through gardening by teaching them notions of planning, nurturing, and follow-through. At the simplest level, we wanted to plant the Hepzibah garden and ensure that it was maintained all through the year. And the third one was really key to what we wanted to do. We really wanted to engage community partners in this project. And we wanted to ensure ongoing commitment to the garden by those partners. And so one of the ways we did that was by creating a step-by-step guide for new partners. And over there on the right, you see our project plan. So it was on just a line of dates and what needed to be done and who was responsible for doing that. So that helped keep us on track. So we started, one of the things we needed to do was just survey the land, and we needed to survey our individual selves too. So both a group process and a real process. So there we are looking at the beat up garden at Hepzibah. So this garden's in the middle of the Hepzibah backyard. That's where the kids play. So they trample across it, which has been a problem in the past. So we took a look at that with Root Riot, and Seamus was like, we need to build a fence here, and you need to get some better soil. So we knew that one of the things was going to be getting rid of some of the bad soil and building fences. And then we looked at ourselves and we thought, okay, Rhea has experience with grant writing, Molly and I have horticultural background in our own backyard. And so Kathleen had the academic background and some of the more philosophical outlook. So we tried to look at what those skills were that we could bring. So this is the first proposal that Root Riot gave us on what the garden would look like. So you see the beginning of some fences there. This was a beautiful plan. It was very costly. It was about $10,000. And so we began to look at ways we could cut that back to something that was reasonable for us to do. One of the things that Root Riot had included, which was really interesting, was a composting bin We had done some work with the students on worm composting that they were really excited about, so we thought initially to include that. We also had some talk about having a chicken coop, not only to provide eggs for the children, but also some of the Habsburg kids that have been placed have had difficulty in homes that have pets because they weren't used to animals, and so we thought, well, maybe if we brought chickens, they'd get used to animals, and that would be a helpful thing. But those were areas we decided to cut in the interest of finance. So one of the challenges, of course, is financing a project like this. So one of the ways we managed that was to cut out some things that we thought weren't crucial to the nature of horticultural therapy. Another was trying to get volunteers to manage this whole thing. We knew that we had to dig down about 12 inches of topsoil out of that garden. So if you've done any digging, you know how heavy that is. So we knew we had to get some people to help us do that. And then just also having a knowledge base of how to integrate the children into the process. Whoa. Okay. So these are just some pictures of the first and second build days when we were replacing dirt with soil. So we dug out about 30 cubic yards of dirt and dumped it in a back alleyway, legally. All fine. And the very first build day, we didn't engage the kids that much. We thought, I think mistakenly, that it would be too hard and that the kids wouldn't be into it. So we had a discussion afterwards and decided, you know, if we want the kids to be part of this garden and own it, we got to get them involved in every step of the way. So the second build day, we had the kids out there almost all day with us, and they were really into it, and they loved it. And it was really a learning experience for all of us in the value that kids bring to work and how valuable they see work. These are some of the other activities we did with kids. This top picture up to the left is the worm composting bin. Don Necrocious, a master gardener, brought in his worms, and he had planned a whole talk about compost, but the kids just wanted to hold the worms. They loved them. The Dominican kids met with Dominican students, I should say, met with the Habsburg kids initially for a dinner to get to know them. And we did they planted little seeds in cups with their pictures on them. They planted wheatgrass so that the hair grew out of the top of the cups. And we made stepping stones with them. So some of the things that we learned as a project in this, in terms of group building, were that if you want something done, it's best to give it to a busy person. So we knew that we were all really busy, and so we tended to give the busiest person the first task to do. That seemed to work for us. Another central lesson that we learned was go with the flow and trust. And I think this was all based on the fact that when we did give the task to the busiest person, she came through for us. And so we learned that lack of clarity was accepted in our group, and that was all right. That we understood that everyone would bring her best self. And then we had this belief that if you build it, they will come. And they did. So we knew that if we built this garden at Habsburg, we would get volunteers to come, and indeed that came to pass. Another thing we learned was never underestimate the power of the cocktail as an incentive. CLP has learned this lesson well. They've bribed you all here with cocktails afterwards. And I mean that not totally flippantly, but it really was a reflection of how our group functioned as a culture. That we really enjoyed spending time together and relaxing together and making our work fun as well. And then finally, one of the things that we learned was that groups perform best when their members are allowed to do that for which they are most qualified. So finding out the skill sets that we had and letting people do that thing was best. So here's some pictures of planting day. Just wanted to take a few look at them.
That's one of the children, correct?
Yeah. Molly's going to talk more about this, but I just wanted to give you a little visual here. It was such a beautiful book.
I talked to some of the Dominican students during planting day, asking them, you know, what struck them or surprised them in working with the children. And Ty, he was saying that just so happened they were also holding worms again for the second time. He thought it was really interesting how excited the children were about holding worms, playing with, and then how they were actually connecting with them giving them their names. So, and they would say, oh, this is Jimmy, and it's my worm, and he's happy. And so when we were thinking about, is this also a therapeutic experience, while we didn't do any evaluation on the children and what they learned pre and post tests, there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that came from the volunteers.
And I wanted to talk just very briefly about this picture because it was another way to try to connect the children to the garden. They were planting strawberries and raspberries, and so on planting day we made little cups with whipped cream at the bottom and strawberries and raspberries on top so the kids could eat them and understand that they were going to be creating this kind of thing for themselves. And then the stepping stones that they made would be planted.
Okay, so you saw how the garden germinated and you saw the growth. And so I'm going to talk to you about the flowering and the fruit. I would say that I consider the flowering to be the successes that we had. And let me tell you, there were many. I would say the first success was the Dominican students. So Michelle and I went to the first class and we spoke to them about what we were doing. And at that time, we really didn't know what we were doing, but we presented this idea of either volunteering at the food pantry or volunteering at Hepzibah. And there were some that seemed very interested and some that didn't say a word, but they seemed that they might be interested. So I created a garden club. And this garden club was this group of students that I communicated with about what was going on at the garden and when they could get involved and volunteer. Well, they got involved. And this garden club really bonded with the Hepzibah kids. And it was really just magical. For example, Ty, who's not here, who the kids just adore, had the same birthday as one of our residents, Dakota. So their birthday just happens to be April 4th. So on April 4th, Ty came back and he had birthday dinner with Dakota. So right away, just making this lasting connection with Dakota. And so now, every time the kids come over, any of the Dominican students come over, they can tell you, well, Tess can tell you that the Hepzibah kids just greet them with a hug and let's go back to the garden. So there was this really a great success in the bonding that happened. And they were really active participants, the Dominican students, in all the different activities that we did. Another success was the Hepzibah children. So for those of you who are not familiar with Hepzibah, at our group home over on North Boulevard, we have 26 kids that live there, some of the most abused and neglected children from the state of Illinois. And there's two programs there. There's a long-term residence and a diagnostic treatment center. We chose to mainly focus with the kids from the residence, the long-term residents, the 10 kids that live upstairs. And by doing that, we felt like we could have, to be honest, better control. And the kids would have a better connection with the Dominican students because there weren't that many, there were only 8 to 10 Dominican students at any one time. And what the Hepzibah kids learned, they learned about making friends, and they learned about the Dominican students saying that, you know what, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and the Dominican student came back. And they also learned the importance of caring and tending the garden, because they started from the beginning to build something, and they knew that it was important, and they watched everyone else show that it was important, so they too showed care for the garden. Another success was the Hepzibah's Oak Park Auxiliary. So this is a group of women that have been volunteering to plant the garden for a number of years. And they have always done their part. They've come in to plant the garden. But what has happened in the past is that, well, first of all, the soil wasn't so good. And second, that the garden wouldn't get watered, so the plants weren't kept up. So we were really excited to kind of partner with them, and they came back with us on planting day, and were there with the kids planting the garden. And I remember Mary Ann saying in January, this is before we had really nailed down our plan. We've got to get our garden going this year. We've got to get it planted, but then we got to keep it alive. How are we going to do that? So it was just one of those things that really came together. Another one of our successes was we felt like we got some good local coverage from the Wednesday Journal. So Michelle had written a press release, and then the Wednesday Journal picked it up and did a little story about it. We supplied them with pictures. So, I mean, for you guys, you probably know, it's really exciting to be in the Wednesday Journal. So, and then Hepzibah, we used it as one of our e-news pieces, as did Root Riot. So it was kind of, we were trying to get the word out there that this was happening. Another one of our successes was we created a guide. So here's a copy of the guide. It'll be available if you want to look at it. And the guide is a step-by-step process, and really it was the Dominican students that created the guide. So let me back up to say that we, engaged them in not only volunteering for us, but they really helped to create the guide, and they were really the main people in creating the guide. So the guide is a step-by-step process of how to create a community garden. Ours happens to be for Hepzibah, but it could be easily tailored for any other organization in the community. So we were really, really happy about that. But the real success of the garden is the fact that if you walked over there today, you would see these healthy plants growing, and you'd know that we were going to get vegetables this year. We have a beautiful flower garden, and we have a beautiful vegetable garden, and we are going to see the fruit of our labor. I mean, so that is really exciting. I remember Mary Ann saying, we're not going to get anything out of that. I'm like, yes, we are. We're going to have fruits and vegetables coming out of the garden. So basil, yeah. Basil, yeah. So that was really, those are really the successes. So the fruit, I think about the fruit as what were the surprises? What surprised us? And what did we learn from some of those surprises? So I guess the first surprise was the connections we made. So all these people working together, the Community Foundation, the Food Pantry, Dominican, Hepzibah, Root Riot. Everyone came together and really bonded and did such an amazing job. But it really felt even bigger than that. It felt like the stars were like in alignment for all of this to happen. The weather was always great. Every time we were out there, I mean, everything just worked. And what we realized is that, what we learned is that making connections is really about caring for one another and working toward the same goal. So all of us had this goal, and anyone we brought in had, we just swept them up into our goal, and they all proceeded to help us. Another one of our surprises, the fruit, I call the fruit, was the student coursework, the Dominican students. So the course that they took was called Power, Wisdom, Tragedy, and Hope. And I'll be honest, the first day I went to their classroom, I paid no attention to the course they were taking. Kathleen talked about it a little bit, but then she asked us to talk. So they're taking this course, and with the course, they had to read classic texts about why bad things happen to good people. And another part of their coursework was that they had to volunteer. They had to volunteer in hopes to create hope where tragedy has occurred. So many of the students decided to volunteer at Hepzibah, and many volunteered at the food pantry. And the students were really taken by Hepzibah. And then something else happened. A past employee and a volunteer named Alex Anderson died at a very young age. His mom is here. He was a kid at heart. He made a huge impact on the students of Hepzibah. He began as a volunteer, and then he volunteered, I think, for like 9 years, and then he became an employee in our daycare program. And his family decided to tell people to give their memorial gifts to Hepzibah. And at that time, I spoke to Mary Ann, and Mary Ann said, we needed to, first of all, Root Riot said, you need to name your garden. And Mary Ann said, well, we need to call it the Alex Anderson Memorial Garden. That's what it has to be called. So I want to give special thanks to Ann for coming. And her family came out the day of planting day, and they were just a part of it, and they planted most of the plants in the, not the vegetable garden, in the flower garden. And it was just, after the planting, we had a dedication, and it was just, it just brought the whole thing together. And I think what it did is that the Dominican students were like, wow, this is what it's about. We really actually are providing hope. And what we learned is that healing and hope can even be found in tending a garden. So we set out to build a protected garden, because what we knew was that if we continued to garden like we did at Hepzibah, it was not gonna work. So we set out to build a protected garden where Hepzibah would be able to eat the fruits and vegetables, and we'd even be able to give some away to the food pantry. And what we learned about human suffering and the power of making connections. And Cultivating Community has been just that. It's been a garden where we've cultivated a sense of community and helped create a little hope in the face of tragedy. So I urge you to stop by and see our little seedlings, because now they're big plants. Now we have a little montage and a little song. Do you have any questions?